Good morning, Don.
Good morning, David. How are you doing?
Doing well yourself?
I'm doing great, thank you. It is a pleasure to be here. Thank you so much.
I'm super happy to have you here. It's really, really interesting how much work and how much energy you put into helping people get into their PhD programs. Um, of course, you have a book. This is something that I've maybe had one conversation on the show specifically on getting in programs in genetic counseling, but your work is really more broad in terms of just helping people uh, getting into graduate school and based on years of experience in that domain. So I'm super happy to be here.
I have been very fortunate. I fell into my career in admissions and enrollment management right out of college, David. I didn't ever plan on this. It wasn't something I was aspiring to initially, but as soon as I'll be forever grateful that I accepted that first offer to become an admissions counselor, and I fell in love with it and never left. And it has truly been um, on so many levels an amazing journey.
Mm. Well, and let's share a little bit of this story here today. And actually, one of the first things that I want to do is to really quickly present you and let yourself talk a little bit more about this journey that you've had and how you, like you say, you fell into this career. So to present you, I'm going to share the information that you sent me. That's very summarized, but we'll then talk a little bit more about it.
Okay.
So, Don Martin has spent 28 years, 28 years in full development management, including positions at Columbia, University of Chicago, and Northwestern University. It's funny. This week's episode of the show is by a psychology professor from Northwestern.
Oh, wow. How about that?
Yeah, and I just noticed that. I just noticed
How
that.
about that? It's a small world.
It's a small world. Now you founded a grad school roadmap in 2008. You've coached over 400 PhD applicants since then, with a 97% acceptance rate, and also you have a book that you have published that is actually called Roadmap for Graduate Studies. People can find it on your website,
Yes.
gradschoolroadmap.com slash the book. So clearly, this is this question of getting people admitted into their programs is at the core of your career journey, but also of your personal mission in life. That's what it feels like, Don.
I could not have said it better than what you've just described. If if we had more time, I would be able to share a little more of my story, but to capsulate it a little bit, my background was one where education was not viewed very highly. And in fact, it was viewed as dangerous. And so my early years, my school, grade school, high school, even college, were pretty much dictated by those who had the authority over me at that time. But I knew that there was more out there that I wanted to learn beyond this area that I was being taught by those, again, who were kind of in charge of my life. And so I applied to graduate school largely, David, to get away and to give myself an opportunity to really, truly learn. And it was just, I don't have words to describe the amazing experience I had in my master's program. And then, even though my undergraduate preparation was not as competitive or usual as most candidates might have, Northwestern gave me a chance. They admitted me for my PhD there, and those 6 years changed my life. And
Mm,
so, along with that, I was already doing enrollment management and was meeting students, some of whom were similar to me. who
Hmm.
had some hurdles to overcome educationally and other things in their earlier years. And some of them would say, I don't think I can do it. I don't know if I can do grad school. I don't know if I have what it takes. And I was literally, I put it in my book. And I mean this. If I can do this, anyone can do this. I've said this to thousands of students. And so education truly changed my life. And so now to feel like I can give back is what I feel like I'm doing, and working with individuals who, like myself, want to further their educational and professional goals has been nothing short of amazing. It's why I'm now 70 years old and I still am doing. I don't want to stop. I know I probably will at some point, but I love this work. I feel like sometimes I get paid to play. I absolutely love what I do. It's I get up in the morning excited about the appointments I'm going to have and the students I'm going to speak with, and then to work with them through the process and see them get admitted to many of their options and make their enrollment decision and go through the program and succeed, and it is just I honestly I'm one of the luckiest guys on the planet as far as I'm concerned.
No, I can only imagine, and seeing people then succeed in their goal and in their vision must be very gratifying.
It is. It truly is.
Now, one question that stems from what you just said is,
Uh-huh.
it's been years you've been doing this. For sure, there's been evolution. You've seen things change, but there must be also some common themes that have stayed in what obstacles people perceive, because sometimes it's a perception, but also what actual obstacles people hit when thinking or considering going into grad school. Do you have some like major pain points that you can right away say, okay, people who come to me, mostly they have, or very typically they have this mindset issue and maybe this issue that's more like bureaucratic. Is there two or three that you can point out?
That's a great question. And if I may, the earlier part of your question, you mentioned that some things may have evolved or changed over
Yes.
time and others haven't. And I'm very I very rarely have someone suggest that insight, and you're absolutely spot on, David. Um, Interestingly enough, in my experience, what has changed is perhaps what I might call the technology of the process. When I first started in admissions, and of course in any area, if you were hiring people for jobs or you were admitting students, everything was paper. You sent things through the mail. You had all these thousands of documents in file folders all over. Now it's so everything is automated. You don't have to do any of that anymore. And in fact, something else that has evolved over time is that in certain professions, certainly medicine and law, but even in some cases with doctoral programs, although not as much, you can submit one app or fill out one application and it goes to all of the schools you want to apply to.
Oh
That was
well.
unheard of back in the day. So those things have dramatically changed. What has not changed, in my experience, is the process of completing an application. What it is you are asked to do as an applicant to get ready to submit your credentials for review by the admissions committee.
Mhm.
We still ask for a CV. We still ask for you to complete what I call the busy work section, all of the demographic data that they want you to fill in. They still want essays. They still ask you for letters of recommendation. They still give you an optional opportunity to explain a part of your application that you may think is a little less competitive for some reason. And in
Okay.
the case of PhD applicants, the critical component of faculty outreach before you submit your application. That none of this has changed.
Mhm.
The components of an application are absolutely the same.
Hmm.
Now, that said, the mindset, to answer the other question, the mindset of applicants, PhD prospective students and applicants who contact me is often one of, in my first, I offer a 30-minute free consultation. Oftentimes that exceeds 30 minutes, and that's no problem. But I think the element that is most apparent is a bit of trepidation about
Hmm.
this process. This is, this is a very competitive process. So few get in, not because there aren't qualified candidates, but because there aren't that many openings. Usually, because if you are admitted, you are fully funded.
Hmm.
So applicants are, I think, nervous. And one of the questions that I'm almost always asked in that first meeting is, do you, in one way or another, do you think I have what it takes? Do you, as you look at my CV, my resume, do you think I have a chance at even doing this? Is really, and then underneath that are just, I'll try to make this as quick as I can, are a couple of other what I call myths about this process. The biggest one being that I don't have the academic profile that
Hmm.
will allow me to be a competitive candidate. I don't have I wasn't a straight A student. Uh, I my te- if I'm required to take the GRE, for instance, or the GMAT,
Hmm.
or even the LSAT, if you're going for a Doctor of Laws degree, that test score is not very strong, and I'm worried that I will not have what it takes, or I am not. It takes me a long time to put my thoughts in writing, and I'm
Hmm.
a little worried about how I may not always feel I write quite as well.
Hmm.
Another is I don't have years of research already under my belt before I'm applying, and I'm concerned that. And so my
May I ask you if there's this one that I'm going to share?
please,
I'm a first generation graduate student. I don't have a role model to follow. I feel like I'm in over my head.
thank you. That is that. In fact, now that you say this, David, I don't want to misspeak here. I haven't ever really calculated it, but several of the PhD applicants with whom I've worked are exactly that. First,
Hmm.
and you know what? I am. I was
Me
the
too.
only one. Yeah, I was the only one, and you and I that were fortunate enough to have the chance to go to college, let alone graduate school. I had
Hmm.
no one mentoring me through this experience. I didn't have that opportunity. And yes, they do mention that in our conversations. But those are some of the things that I would say contribute to their overall mindset. That first conversation I might have with someone.
Hmm. Excellent. And so um, because I've had conversations where this we kind of broach this subject from another angle, and I'm thinking conversations around minorities and underrepresented people who also go through this problem of not being able to have a role model to emulate and that feel lost. And they you were talking about the busy work, even just the busy work or the paperwork feels like a huge hurdle to them. uh, what's for someone who's listening and who's considering graduate school but maybe is in this position of maybe I don't belong there, usually what's your avenue to getting them to start believing that, hey, if you're considering this, you deserve to allow yourself to picture and envision yourself in a PhD program.
David, it's amazing to me that we did not discuss the questions you would ask me before we met here. And I am loving this conversation with you already because the questions I mean this sincerely.
Well,
Your questions are so insightful and so relevant. I thank you so much. the what I have often shared, if I've done a speaking engagement, a webinar, whatever, about the PhD process, I've often said, in my opinion and in my own personal experience, completing a PhD is as much about persistence and determination as it is academic. Of course, you have to have the ability to do it, of course, and academically, you need to be successful in that with your dissertation and so forth. But the 6 years I spent completing my PhD were thrilling, but as we go through life experiences, and I had some things hit me that I didn't
Hmm.
expect, and due to my life story, those words of persistence and determination have been part of my experience. And so when someone approaches me from what we might call a minority group, or who is concerned about how they might be received or whether they have what it takes, I often say, if you have completed an undergraduate education, or and added to that perhaps a master's degree or professional experience, and you are already at this stage, you've already demonstrated that you have the persistence and determination to do this. You've
Hmm.
already proven that through other accomplishments that you have attained. The other thing I will say is that, again, in my experience, PhD admissions committees are not looking for clones of students who are all of the same background, ethnicity, life experience, whatever group or part of underrepresented you want to put in there. They are truly welcoming students of color. There are fewer women sometimes who are pursuing PhDs. That is something perhaps based on your religious or ethnic heritage, your sexual orientation, whatever it is. My experience is that admissions committees very much welcome someone who might consider themselves different, shall we say, or
Hmm.
not in the mainstream. I certainly wasn't on many
Hmm.
levels. I wasn't, and um, I also found that, at least in my program, I was in the School of Education at Northwestern, and my faculty members, David, were I will never forget it. They almost took me in like one of their own. They
Hmm.
mentored me, they encouraged me. They were almost pushing me more than I was pushing myself at times, in the good sense of that word.
Hmm.
So for someone who might be listening to us today or might hear this down the road, if that happens, don't in any way underestimate or devalue what you bring to the table in terms of however you might consider yourself different.
Hmm.
That could
Hmm.
actually be a very positive aspect of what you bring to the table.
That's amazing, and it's really turning things on their head. And I wasn't expecting that answer, but it does make a lot of sense, especially today in 2024. But it's very encouraging to hear that from someone who knows, you know the ropes. You've been doing this for years. So if someone's listening and wondering about this, Don just gave you permission to apply. That's
Well,
right.
if I may just add one quick fact, of these over 400 or so PhD candidates that I've had the privilege of working with, and who almost all of them been successful in their journey, in their application journey, the backgrounds of these individuals, David, they are not 395 white male U.S. citizens who all had bachelor's or master's programs at the top 10 universities and 4.0 GPAs and 99th percentile test score. That's just not true. That is absolutely not the case. And as a former admissions dean myself for 28 years, I evaluated personally over 125,000 applications, and I had the privilege of working. I didn't plan it this way, but I ended up having a chance to work at some very, very well-known institutions that are very competitive. And we certainly did not, you might be surprised if you knew the actual credentials of some of the applicants we admitted. I'll just, now this was not a PhD applicant, but it was a business school applicant at the University of Chicago Booth School of Business, one of the best. And I admitted a candidate, if you're familiar with the GMAT, the highest score on the GMAT is an 800. Most applicants, I haven't been working at Chicago Booth for a long, long time, but I would assume that their average GMAT score is well over 700 for their incoming class every year. I admitted a gentleman with a 390 GMAT one year. And you heard me, 390. You get a 200 if you just walk in there and sit there and don't do anything. You get a 200. He had a 390. And it wasn't just me. The committee unanimously said, we got to have him. Now, I didn't tell my dean about this score until after this person graduated. And I went in my next meeting with the dean. I said, I'd like you to take a look at, you know this, you remember this student? Oh, he's an outstanding student. He's working at a top investment bank. He's one of our best and all. And I said, yeah, he was phenomenal, wasn't he? He said, yes. I said, I want you to see his GMAT score. I think his glasses almost fell off. He just, his mouth, he just went, are you serious? I said, this is why, again, another one of my mantras, if you will, when I coach, and it's been true of me in my own life, certainly at the undergraduate level. Success in life is not always directly correlated with a 4.0 GPA or a 99th percentile test score. It just isn't. It's a fact. You cannot make sweeping predictions and stereotypical decisions just because I denied many applicants to Chicago Booth, for instance, or Columbia or Northwestern, who had all the top academics, but that was almost all they had. There was nothing else. And I admitted students with lower GPAs, lower test scores, who had so much to bring to the table. And so, again, anyone out there listening, now, yes, at the PhD level, you have to go into it realistically, knowing that your chances of getting in, not because of who you are or any shortcomings on your end, but your chances are low just because they take so few from the applicant pool. But that should never hold you back. And some of my candidates in that 97%, David, were second-time applicants who, like me, did not get in the first time. I didn't get into Northwestern the first time. I got in the second time. And do not, if you're listening to me, please do not assume you can't do this or that somehow you're not good enough. That oftentimes is not true.
Well, in my case, I applied to different PhD programs. This was in Europe, so there's differences there. I didn't get accepted to the first one, but I'm sure, and I applied a little bit older than the other applicants. I had 2 years. I'd worked a couple of years between my master's and applying.
Yep.
And I'm sure, although I've never discussed this with the professors who now I have good relationships with, but that what made a difference was my interview. And where I'm going with is, it feels to me like, okay, these metrics, these standardized tests are kind of benchmarks that kind of make it easy to have a certain idea of the candidate. But it feels to me that throughout these years, you have identified and you've experienced that there's something else that is actually at the core of what the quality of a candidate is, where it resides. Can you talk a little bit about this?
David, I'm going to hire you to do interviews with me after this. We're going to do this. We're going to do this all the time. This is wonderful. Yes, in my Someone once told me, I wish I could remember who it was. I'd like to thank them personally. This was early in my, either late in my college career, early in my master's career. They said, Don, if people know you, like you, and trust you, they will work with you.
Mm, mm, mm. I love
In
it.
my experience, whatever we do in life is about relationships and how well we are able to communicate and interact and get along with other people. I don't care if you have two PhDs from the top unit, from Harvard and Oxford and Cambridge and Stanford. It doesn't matter. If you cannot navigate successfully the ability to work well with others and to have their trust, you're not offering very much.
Mm.
Furthermore, in my opinion, even at the PhD level, although you're a bit more focused on your research and working with specific advisors, but and there's not an overwhelming number of students like there might be at the master's or the undergrad, but still, your life as a PhD student is not just in the classroom, David. We know it isn't just sitting there studying or writing your papers. It's navigating a relationship with tenured faculty members. Now, if that doesn't take some skill, I mean, faculty members are wonderful in some ways, but they can also be very difficult to deal with sometimes.
Yeah.
And you've got to have the ability to be able to interact effectively with your faculty members, with fellow students. You need to be able to not just be siloed in the life of your mind. And you need to be able to interact and live your life and be part of a community. And that's where I don't believe test scores or GPAs always predict that as well as some essays that you will read from this candidate, interactions you have with him or her over the course of time, how you observe them if they attend one of your admissions events, for instance, how their recommenders. This could be a topic for a whole webinar. Recommendation letters can make or break an application completely. 90% of the recommendation letters I read during my 28 years were meaningless. They were useless. So a very well constructed recommendation letter is paramount. And then, to your point, an interview. I made admission decisions at many of the institutions I worked. We did interviews, and there was an interview report form that would go in the file, the application file. I asked my administrative assistant to put that interview at the top of the file, not at the bottom. And if that applicant had a bad interview and I didn't believe there was any other extenuating circumstance, they just did not perform well in that interview, they were waitlisted at best. At best. Did not matter what else was in that file. And I too, by the way, I did not start my PhD until I was 33, and I graduated just before turning 40. I was not in the younger group doing this. And excuse me. And I believe, I would like to believe, although I never asked them, but I do think that my ability to communicate and my love of people and my love of talking, which you're definitely discovering, is something that was helpful. So interview, if you get invited to interview, that still doesn't mean you're going to get in, but it does mean you've made it to a next level. And that is paramount.
This makes a lot of sense to me. And Don, what I'm discovering is all the parallels between what you're saying for getting into a graduate school program and what I try to share about getting into a job, especially a non-academic job after you get your degree. There's so many parallels. It's amazing.
It is. No, well, in a way, I think some of the greatest truths in life are universal and somewhat simple. They're not
Mhm.
hard to understand. They may be hard to execute sometimes, but there are lots of similarities. Absolutely.
Mm. So now a question, because a lot of the audience of Beyond the Thesis with Papa PhD is international. There's people from Asia, people from India, and I know, Africa, Europe. I know that a lot of people want to eventually come to graduate school in North America, in the US, and thinking about, for example, what you wrote in the book, and maybe we could talk about the book starting now a little bit more, and the
Sure.
process of how you got into deciding to write about it. But maybe I wonder if some of the students that you've worked with have been foreign students, and what are uh, again usually questions that are recurrent in this population, and what's maybe one starting point for someone who's listening and who's, let's say, in India, and thinking, okay, I'd like to go to the US, to Columbia or to Northwestern, but I feel lost about the process. What type of, how do you start a conversation and start them on their path to a successful application?
Great question. And actually how we get started in a way is the order of the chapters of my book, which
Hmm.
are entitled Getting Started, then Getting In, which is the
There you
application
go.
process, and then Getting Out, which is how to succeed once you're there. So this is an excellent question. And let me just say, David, in the 17 years now that I've been coaching graduate school applicants, including PhD candidates, I have worked with students from every continent. Well, not Antarctica, but every other continent. Uh, I have so I and I have visited 64 countries in my life, and many of those were related to my admissions work. I was going to meet students from uh, every corner of the. I was in Australia, I was in Africa, Asia, Europe, Latin America. So I believe that I am able to successfully communicate and work with students regardless of where they are on the
Mhm.
planet, so to speak. If I'm speaking with an international student for the first time about the PhD process, I think your point is very well taken. Sometimes, just based on lack of information, their international students may not be sure even what to do. They would like to study this particular field, whatever it may be, but there's no one to show them the ropes. There's no one to help guide them through. And usually, my suggestion, although this may seem a little simplistic, is that, and if they hire me, I sometimes do this for them, but some of my clients do this part on their own, is to do some searching on the internet and plug in. Let's just say you're interested in the field of psychology,
Mhm.
or just for the example, for another one of the sciences, maybe you want to pursue a PhD in biology.
Mhm.
You can log on to your search engine, whichever it is, your browser, and plug in PhD programs in psychology in the United States. That will open up
Mhm.
a plethora of links for you. Now, not all of those are as reliable as others, and that's where I help applicants to make sure they're looking at resources that are viable and reliable. There's another option. This is a free service available to anyone around the world. It's called Grad Schools, plural, gradschools.com. There are over 70,000. Now, Some of these programs are overseas, but the majority are in the US. 70,000 accredited graduate programs in their database. And
Okay.
you can log on there and plug in what you are interested in, and you could get a list of 150 options on. And I deliberately mentioned the word accredited because in order to be viewed as a viable educational option, at least in the US, you as an institution, you must have accreditation from the official academic accrediting body in your state and perhaps your region.
Okay.
And this process is not for the weak and the timid. This is a and you have to go through it every 5 years or every 10 years. You don't just get accredited once and you're home free. You have to. When I worked at Columbia, we had to go through this process. I was put in charge of facilitating the reaccreditation process while I was there. Took us 2 years. It was a huge undertaking, and this happened. So that's why I say accredited. These are viable, accredited programs, and that's a place to at least get started with. Then you get the name of a particular institution. Maybe you, as a student, if you're listening, you have an idea. I'd like to study in North America, but I might consider not just the US, I might consider Canada. Maybe I'd like to consider a couple of places in Europe or Australia or whatever. You can begin to get some names of programs. Some you may have already heard of, but then you can start looking on their websites initially to do some preliminary research. And I want to say this: be very careful about how much emphasis you place on rankings. This is another topic I could spend hours discussing. Rankings are my feelings. This is my own feelings are much more negative than positive because of the methodology of several of them. They're usually done in order to sell magazines or subscriptions or whatever. I'd like to see an educational organization take on a ranking. So there's no tie-in with having to sell copies of the newspaper or the magazine or whatever it is. In my opinion, there's very little evidence that the rank of your graduate program, your PhD program, ultimately is correlated to your long-term success in life. I don't see it. Does a more reputable, or I don't even like that word, does a more highly ranked program maybe open a few doors more than another? Maybe. But back to what I said about if people know you, like you, and trust you, they'll work with you. If you are a phenomenal PhD student, you've done a good job, you've done well in that program, you're going to be okay if you stay in academia, and even if you don't. But my point is, that's what you're looking for as an international student. I would say even more so here than a US student. If you're wanting to, you want a community where you feel a part. You want to be welcomed, appreciated, accepted, taken in completely. And I must say, I will not, of course, name names. If you want that, there are certain universities I'd steer you away from right at the start, because that's not what they offer. So, and you need to spend some time once you get this list of options you have in mind, maybe 10 or 12 or 20, whatever. One of the things you want to clearly try and determine as best you can, what is this campus really like? What is this community? One of the things you should do, contact a current student and a recent graduate. And if you don't ask anything else, ask them these two questions. What did you like? What did you like most? Or what do you or did you like most or least about this program? And secondly, if you had it to do over again, knowing what you now know, would you still enroll there?
Yeah.
It's been my clients do this, and they take schools off their list as the result of just asking those two questions.
Mhm. That makes a lot of sense. It's something that I've heard said in different ways, but these two questions, yeah, they're going to tease out the rotten apples for sure.
You
and
exactly.
and and they're really important. This question of scouting or scoping the terrain before deciding is really important, because then once you're in, it's a long relationship, because it is going to be a relationship with the university, the program, the PI, etc. And it can be complicated to change supervisors, and people do it, but it adds a lot of stress and difficulty to something that should not be a burden in your life. It should be a challenge, of course. Graduate school should be a challenge to a certain extent, but
Yes,
not a
yes.
burden to your mental health, not a reason to quit because of external situations, for sure.
I love the
Um,
words you just used there, David. It is a challenge. You want it to be. You don't want to just go in there and feel like, well, what am I doing here? I don't have to. I didn't have to attend. No, you want to be challenged, but you don't want it to be a burden. That is a very. That's an excellent. And you mentioned earlier, why did I write my book? Very quickly, I wrote it for two reasons. Mostly, well, three. One, I don't believe most prospective students do good research before they apply. They usually adhere to rankings or word of mouth. And that, I'm not saying you shouldn't do that at all, but I list 26 areas in chapter 1 of my book that you should be comparing when you're doing your research. This should be a much when you go out to buy a car, you don't just look at something on the lot and say, "I'll take that." No, you don't go to a party and meet someone and say, "I'll marry you." No, that would be ludicrous. Well,
mm,
many applicants do that when they're choosing their educational program. They do very little research. That's the first reason. The second was the application process. I felt there was so much more beyond grades and test scores that no one was telling students about.
mhm.
And thirdly, I haven't seen any book out there that talks about how to succeed once you're there. So that's why I wrote the book.
Mhm. Excellent. And these are all important subjects. Succeeding while you're in there, the interesting thing is that a lot of it has to do with how you prepared before getting in there. So it makes sense to have this sequence. Now, um, still about the book, and I'm just mentioning that someone from Portugal is saying hi. So, like I was telling you, the listenership is international,
Hello,
and
Portugal. Beautiful.
um, now, still about the book. Um, if someone is so, and I'm sharing the link here for people who are watching now, but I will share the link in the show notes of the episode when it comes out on the podcast. Also, I will want you to send me the link. I think it was gradschools.com or .org, but send that link to me, because I want to include it in the links too.
Will do.
Perfect. Now, the question is, if someone, before, because you have your services, your coaching services, of course, but I guess the book is already something that, if someone wants to prepare or to feel to orient themselves, they can start with the book and then eventually decide if they want to reach out to you.
Absolutely. And I'm going to share something that some may find surprising for me to say, because they'll say, "You mean you don't want to coach?" No, I do. But if you buy and read my book, especially chapters 1 and 2, you may not need to work with me very much, if at all. There a lot of what's now there are some nuances. Sometimes someone will say, "I've read your book, Dr. Don. I still have a couple areas I'm wondering if I could ask you to help me with." And of course, I'm happy to do that. But
Mhm.
yes, it's the book is only 106 pages long. That was by design. I thought I could have written a volume. I could have written 1,000 pages on all of this, but I thought, who's going to buy a book that's they won't even touch it? I saw it. It's almost like in some ways, it's almost like a summary of a book. It's a summary on how to do good research,
Mhm.
how to what to consider in the entire application process and how to succeed once you're there. It's you could read it in a couple hours, I would think.
Mm. This is really good for one reason is that students often don't have or feel that they don't have a lot of time, and
No.
2 hours is really not a lot of investment. Now, you were saying something, and it aroused this question for me. It raised this question for me, which is, you might read the book, and actually the outcome of you reading book could be, well, now that and I'm gonna backtrack a little bit.
Okay.
A lot of the angst that people might have about getting into graduate school comes from, and it's true in life in general, but it's ignorance of what's on the other side.
That's right.
Maybe they can also read the book and see, okay, this is not for me. That's a
Right.
possible outcome, right?
That's exactly that is, and that's not bad at all. That's just saved them not only time but a lot of money going through
Oh
application
yeah.
processes. I've only had, at least that I know of, I'll put it that way. I've only had one instance where one of my clients ended up getting into the program and it just didn't work. And
Hmm.
I felt badly about that, but that's they got that far before they realized this wasn't for them. But
Hmm.
yes, some of the folks I've spoken with who've read my book, in fact, the very first part of the first chapter are 7 questions to ask yourself about your desire to go to graduate school.
I love
And
it.
I say at the start, please be brutally honest. You're not talking with anybody. You don't have anything. It's just you and yourself. So be honest. And if you answer those questions honestly, I would think some folks might say, you know what, I'm not doing this. And let me also say, success in life is not dependent on whether you have a PhD. Of course, it is not
Mm.
at all. If you want to do it, go for it. And there are many opportunities, as you are so wonderfully helping folks to discover, to use that PhD, whether you're within academia or outside of it. But the point is, you're right. If you do your homework, if I had 100 people sitting in a room listening to me, I would estimate that at least 20 of them would end up deciding not to do a PhD.
Hmm. Hmm. It makes sense. It makes total sense. Don, we are reaching the end of this interview. Time flew by
Oh my word!
in
I
an
can't
amazing
believe
way.
it.
But one thing that I want to ask before I kind of try to sum up what I'm taking home from this, and what I'd like people to take home is, if people want to reach out to you, of course, people who are watching can see that there's a website, gradschoolroadmap.com, super easy, where I guess they can find you and even a contact form, etc. But is there, if someone's wants to really send you a message or comment on something you said on the show or ask a question about it, what's the best way to reach out to you?
The best way is my email address, which I will now give. I'll try to do it slowly. D, this is all lowercase. The letter D as in my name, Don. C as in Charles, and Martin, my last name. Oh no, I apologize. Please forgive me, folks. I'm
No
confusing
worries.
my email. It's D Martin. There's no C in there. I
Mhm.
apologize. D Martin at, and the name of my company, gradschoolroadmap.com. You can send me that, and you will hear back from me within 12 to 24 hours.
Excellent. Now, so please do. You have heard almost for an hour. Don is really nice, really approachable, and really knowledgeable about this. So don't hesitate to write him and to ask him any questions or to comment on something he shared here on Beyond the Thesis. Now, Don, what I'm taking home from this conversation is really interesting because of this parallel between where you're working with people and where typically I'm trying to work with people, which is
Yes.
I'm focusing at transitioning from, I'm in graduate school and now I'm going into the job market. And
Yes.
and so basically I think we're kind of wanting to do the same thing, which is helping people cross afford, helping people, cross a gap or access a space of unknown and making it a smoother experience of it. It feels to me with
Absolutely.
all your years of experience, you've accrued a huge knowledge of how it works, of where to spend energy and where not to, and also you, at least you came across to me as um, someone who gives more importance to the human being
Mhm.
behind an application than to whichever stats are on paper. And I think that's very encouraging. I think for people who might be anxious and thinking, oh, I'm not good enough, comparing themselves maybe with colleagues around, I think if they listen carefully to all you said, they can allow themselves and the right to apply and allow themselves to feel that they belong or that they have the right to belong in this different space, which is graduate school. So I really appreciate all that you've shared here today.
We are not numbers, David. We are human beings. And if an applicant discovers that a program is all concerned about numbers, if that were me, that program wouldn't be on my list. You're absolutely right. We are human beings.
Don, I think this is a great way to end the interview. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you so much for your generosity, sharing all you have shared. And yeah, I'm super happy that we crossed paths and that
I am
you were
too,
here on
David.
Beyond
What
the
a
Thesis.
pleasure. Thank you so much. And my best to you and your amazing work that you're doing. And to those who are listening today, all the best to all of you.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Thanks to everyone who has been watching live. Thank you if you are listening later. This has been again a live recording of Beyond the Thesis with Papa PhD. Today with Don Martin from Grad School Roadmap. I'm David Mendes, your host. See you soon in a future recording of Beyond the Thesis with Papa PhD. Bye. Bye, everyone.